Optimus Celine. You guys have not seen me in a little while. I mean, I know I don't have very many people subscribed to my channel right now. It's mostly just family. But I thought that this would be, a good video to, like, if I look back on things or whatever, and I notice the, like, big gap between my videos, I would know why. And anyone who starts watching my channel, they can know why I stopped making videos for a while. So this video is just to kind of explain my absence and talk about, what's been going on the last, like, 2.5 months since I've made a video. So at the beginning of January, around probably, let's see, I think my last video I posted was on like January 7th, January 8th, somewhere in there. I got sick with COVID around that time, like shortly after that last video was posted, and I might have even been sick while that was posted, but around like the 8th, the 9th, I got sick with COVID. My husband got sick with COVID, and then around that same time, my mom and my dad were starting to get really sick. I'd been talking to them on the phone and everything, and mom had mentioned that dad was starting to like have a really bad cough and everything. And I didn't think too much about it because at this point I wasn't even sure if I had COVID. Within a week after that is whenever I went and I got tested, because, I went to work that day and then I just felt horrible. Like my symptoms, they kind of came and went. That's why I didn't really know whether I got it, and I was kind of stupid and I waited to get tested. But on the 14th, I went and I got tested, and then I believe it was the next day they came back with my positive results. So my dad, he had been having trouble falling and everything, and then he was coughing, so it was making it to where it was kind of worse and happening more often. So he had went into the hospital. I can't remember the exact dates. He went into the hospital for a little bit, and then they tested him. He also had COVID, and then shortly after that they sent him home. Now my dad, he just turned 67 just a couple days ago. My mom, she is 63. He has issues with like autoimmune kind of a thing. Not going to go into too much detail on that. And then my mom, she is diabetic and has had breathing problems in her lifetime, basically. So anyways, my dad, he was sent home from the hospital, and like shortly after, probably like a week later, he was getting worse, and then mom started getting bad. Whenever dad was in the hospital, I would call him, and then pretty much right after I would call him, I would then call my mom because she was starting to get sick. And we all tried to talk her into going to the hospital. At this point, it's probably, I don't know, maybe, if I had to guess, I would say probably this time frame would be from like January 10th to like January 14th, maybe. Mom, she was like, no, I don't feel like going to the hospital. So anyways, she waited until my dad, he then was sent home from the hospital. And Abby, quit. No squeakies. No squeakies. Anyway, so my dad, he was released from the hospital, and they really shouldn't have released him because he was really sick, but they did. And so he went home, and just a day or two later, I received a call from my aunt. Now my aunt, she lives literally 2 minutes down the road from my parents, and they live about 20-30 minutes from me and my closest siblings. So there would have been a bit of a drive before we'd be able to go out there. My aunt and my uncle had been contacted by a paramedic who was trying to get into their house because they had both fallen and they were both on the ground, or not the ground, but the floor. So she told me about that. We were able to like help the paramedics to be able to get in. They helped both of my parents up. They took my mom onto a stretcher because she was having trouble breathing, is why she fell. Apparently she had trouble breathing, and then she ended up on the floor, was not able to get herself back up, and she wasn't even able to crawl to the door to be able to unlock it for the paramedics. My mom, she got taken by ambulance. They tried to talk my dad into going, and he had just gotten released from the hospital, and he didn't think he should have been released either. And I guess, I don't want to say it was out of spite, but you know, he was like, they should have kept me. I'm not going back. So they had helped him back up, I guess, into bed or a chair or something. And that's whenever I started discussing with my siblings about like us going out and, you know, taking care of him for a little bit to hopefully get him better. At this point, I was off on COVID leave because I'd tested positive, so I was off for like my 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever. But me and one of my siblings, we ended up like alternating days taking care of him because my other sibling, he right now isn't working either. So we alternated days, and I told him, you know, wear a mask and everything. And so we took care of Dad. It was the 16th whenever Mom went into the hospital, January 16th. So for the next 4 days, we alternated days. We were taking care of him. And then it got to be the night of January 19th. Dad was waking up every hour on the hour, and he had to go to the bathroom. And he also was having trouble breathing. And we'd been giving him medicine and everything because, you know, the doctor had prescribed like the different vitamins and a thing for his cough. He got to where he was having trouble breathing, and I told him, you know, my brother, he'll be in at noon. If you are not better at that point, I'm taking you to the hospital. So it got to be around, I think, 9:30 that day, and he just said, I can't breathe. You have to take me to the hospital. Which, if you know my dad, that's not a regular thing that he would do. I took Dad to the hospital. It was, I believe it was a Wednesday. I know it was January 20th, and I dropped him off around 10 a.m. that day. So he was having so much trouble breathing that like he pretty much immediately was put onto the ventilator, and he was sedated. So he had that tube all the way into his mouth and down his throat into his lungs. So he was pretty much immediately. Mom, at this point, she'd been in the hospital for 4 days, and she had started out in the ICU, and then she was able to come out of the ICU, and she was just using, at one point, she was using the nasal cannula, and then it got bumped up to where she was doing the full, like, BiPAP mask, which is kind of like if you have sleep apnea, it's the mask that you would wear, very similar to that. She ended up maxing out on both of those devices, so they ended up having to do the same that they had done with Dad. They had to sedate her, and they had to put her on the ventilator. So at this point, Dad had, I believe this is when this happened, Dad had blood clots on his lungs, like both of his lungs, in both of them. And then he also had them in both of his legs. And Mom, she started to have air coming out of her lungs via leaks into her chest wall. So at this point, I had received a call from the doctor. I'd previously been getting updates from nurses and calling every single day to, you know, find out any new things that were going on. So at this point, the doctor called me, and he went over, you know, the air leaks in Mom and the blood clots in Dad's lungs. and he basically told me, your parents have a 10 to 20% chance of surviving this. Like, it's not a guarantee, but your odds are not good to have either of your parents, basically. And so I talked to my siblings and everything, and he told us to, especially for my mom at this point, he was like, you guys need to discuss, like, what you want to do, resuscitation, this, that. Do you want to do comfort care? We had to discuss our options of if at this point we were ready to give up on my mom. Trying not to cry here. Anyways, at this point, we had to decide if we wanted to keep her on the resuscitation or if we wanted to go ahead and basically schedule a time where we could all come in and see her. Well, 3 of us could come in and see her. Or if we just, what we wanted to do. So then my dad, he started pretty well getting better at that point. Like, he was able to get the oxygen lower and lower. And he was able to get off the ventilator. So as far as the ventilators that, they've been using in the hospitals, they like to get you off of those within 2 weeks. Some people have gone up to 3 weeks, but it's not safe for the person. Basically, you've got air just going directly to your lungs from this machine, and if the settings are off even a little, it can cause holes in your lungs, likely what happened to Mom, and it can cause really bad issues in the back of your throat because they've got this tube in there. So it's not safe for you to stay on the ventilator long term with it going through your mouth. Now, my dad, he was able to get off in the 2 weeks. With my mom, she, for a while, whenever she had those air leaks, she was on the completely maxed out settings on the ventilator, and that's whenever they discussed, you guys need to talk about what you want to do as far as comfort care or resuscitation still and whatnot, because they didn't think she was going to make it. So at that point we discussed it, decided, Mom, she would want to live. She had previously, before she went under onto the ventilator, she had said she wants everything done to keep her alive. And that's kind of what we were bringing into discussion. So we were like, that was Mom's wish. She eventually was able to get her settings down a little lower. I don't remember the exact, but I know that she wasn't at 100%. I believe she was at 40 or 50% on the ventilator, but they had tried doing the breathing test to see if she would be strong enough to be able to go on to the next thing. Now, their main concern was, this was at a week and a half on the ventilator with Mom. Their main concern was that if she was able to pass the breathing test, that she would get off the ventilator, be put onto the CPAP machine again, and they were worried that she would end up not being able to handle it and have to go back on the ventilator, which would cause the same issues. They said, now your option here is either we can pull the plug. That was the first option that they gave us. Or they said they could just keep trying and doing the breathing tests and hopefully get her off in the 2 weeks. Or they said that they could give her a tracheostomy, and she would then, at that point, she wouldn't be able to eat, so she would have to have a PEG tube in, which is a feeding tube. And they said with the tracheostomy done, you could then be on the ventilator for longer. You could be on it indefinitely via the trach, because it's safer that way, and it's not going to have that big tube in your throat that's going to mess up your throat and all that stuff. So we had to make the hard decision to approve the tracheostomy and the PEG tube, because at this point we weren't sure if she was going to make it otherwise. So they did the surgeries, they put in the trach and the peg tube, and they said everything looked good, put her on the ventilator. So then she developed a wound on her bottom. I don't know if at one point they weren't turning her quite as often as they should have been, but she got a wound down to her muscle on her bottom, which is a main concern. And then they ended up, because the hospitals in the area that I live, they do not specialize in tracheostomies. It's kind of a smaller town, and they don't see a lot of that. They also do not specialize in wound care. So she had that wound on her bottom, as well as she had a wound developing right beneath her trach. And at first it was just, a small wound, and they were doing their best to keep the moisture from her trach because it was leaking onto there. And of how I understood it, which we were never able to see her at this hospital because she was in like COVID isolation, and they had like stricter rules in my area as far as like their hospitals. So I never got to see the wound, but of what I understood, they put like maybe a little bit of gauze on it, and then that gauze would get wet, and they said they were having trouble keeping the moisture off, so her wound was getting worse. Now, right after this, she started like running fevers and stuff, and they found out that she had an infection. She had MRSA and VRE in the wound in her neck, as well as the one on her bottom. So she got this really bad infection, and now on the wound on her bottom, they were able to put what's called a wound vac on it. It like keeps moisture off, and it helps to keep it dry and make it be able to heal faster. Now, with the wound on her neck, it was so close to her airway that they couldn't do a wound vac. So it was just getting poured on by the mucus and stuff from her trach. So at this point, they'd been discussing sending her, because she had reached her like 45 days, I think it is, give or take, in that hospital. So they were talking about moving her to a long-term hospital, which is called an LTAC. It was taking a while for a bed to be able to be opened in this new LTAC hospital, and so they were just playing the waiting game at this point, trying to do their best to keep her alive with this infection. They had tried multiple different antibiotics, like all of the big guns they had tried, and they got to this medicine called Zyvox, and that was, of what the hospital was saying, that was their last antibiotic that they had for her. I don't know if that's completely true, but that's what the nurse was telling me. So it got to be the day that Mom was gonna leave. I think it was the next day Mom was gonna leave for the LTAC because a spot had finally opened up for her, and the doctors had kind of went over the like, you guys really, really need to discuss if you want to like keep going with your mom, because we don't think she's going to make it, kind of a thing. So the doctor had already previously told me, you guys need to discuss this. And again, we discussed it, made our decisions and everything. But basically we wanted to see how she would do at this new hospital that has more specialized people in, what Mom needed. So this nurse, the day before Mom's going to go to her new home for a little bit, she goes, I don't know what to do with her, and I doubt that they know what to do with her. I'm like, I don't need you to give me like hope necessarily, but I also don't need you to tell me she's screwed. Like, there's no chance, kind of a thing. You don't know. You don't know, like, with their people that specialize more in it, you don't know what their limitations are. We'd already been going through enough with both of them, and I had this nurse tell me, basically, you don't need to mess with it. You might as well just let her go. I was like, I'm going to give them a chance. Sent her to this LTAC, and within a week, Mom started doing better. Her infection was getting better. Her wounds were healing. And she was being able to be on lower and lower and lower amounts of oxygen. Whenever she was on the ventilator, she wasn't able to talk. So, after mom had been through everything and like they had finally been able to wake her up off of all of her sedations that she'd needed whenever she was on the ventilator, like via mouth, before she got the tracheostomy, she was finally off of all of that sedation and she was awake. We were able to visit her at this point. So I saw her about once a week. And, it was kind of hard in the extent of she would be mouthing a mile a minute, basically. Because my mom, she's a real big talker. So she would be mouthing like a mile a minute, trying to talk to me about stuff. And I had no idea what she was saying. My dad basically, he got off the ventilator and he then was able to go to a rehabilitation center and start doing his rehab. He was still at this point, he was on a nasal cannula at 6 liters of oxygen. And so they were going to work on doing his rehab. Again, not going to go into super detailed parts on this, but basically there was some issues at that rehab place, so he ended up having to be sent to a nursing home closer to us to complete his rehabilitation. At this point, Dad is starting to get stronger in the nursing home. Now, Mom, we were having like communication issues because she'd be trying to talk and talk and talk, and I had no idea what she was saying because I couldn't read her mouth, and I would be guessing and she'd be getting frustrated and everything. And, I had to keep reassuring her, Mom, you'll be able to talk again. Like, right now you just can't because, the ventilator's connected to your airway and you can't talk out of your mouth because no air is going into your vocal cords. So anyways, she was able to get off of the ventilator and then she was able to talk. So, like, she got off of this ventilator, which, at this point, I was calling like every other day since she was doing a lot better at this point. I was like, I'm still going to keep up to date on everything, but I don't need to call every single day because I'm not fearing that she's going to die every day like I previously had been. It was, I guess, on one of the days that I hadn't called whenever she got off the ventilator, because then that next day, I think the nurse had said something. She said, your mom is talking a mile a minute. And I had just assumed she meant she was mouthing words a mile a minute. And then she'd said something else. And I said, wait a minute, you said Mom's talking? She said, yeah. I was like, wait, so does that mean she's off the ventilator? She goes, yeah. I was like, oh. After they had taken her off the ventilator, they had put what's called a speaking valve in. And so then some of the air that like she breathed in via her neck, she would have some of that air go up into her vocal cords and it would make it to where she could actually talk and make sounds, because previously she couldn't even make any sounds. Like at one point, because they had to do this suction thing on like her throat to get all that mucus out and keep it from getting too full of it and forming a mucus plug. Basically the like suction made her like cough, but it was a silent cough, which is, I don't recommend anyone ever saying anyone do a silent cough because it is the scariest looking thing. I thought Mom was dying whenever they were doing that suction, but all it was her coughing, but she couldn't make sound. So she got off the ventilator and then she was able to talk, but it was really, really quiet. It was like not even as loud as a whisper. So still some communication issues. She could very seldom like talk louder. Like at one point she got really frustrated and she was like, why can no one ever hear me? At this point, she was still using the CPAP thing to breathe out of her neck, which is basically the same thing as like the face one, except for it's a neck version of it for your trach. So then I went in one day, and they'd said at this point she was on the nasal cannula. She had a little red cap on her trach, which, they have to cap it to where you can then basically start practicing breathing through your nose and your mouth again. I went in and they didn't have anything on her neck and they didn't have anything in her nose. So I asked the nurse, I said, wait, is mom off of oxygen? And they're like, yeah, So one thing I will say about this particular hospital, amazing hospital as far as like the care that they give their patients and like the, being able to make them get better, like amazing. But their communication with family was not good. So like each of these steps I was surprised by because they didn't call me and say, hey, your mom's off the ventilator. Hey, your mom's off oxygen. It was basically, I got the update whenever I called. This lady from my church also was going up to see my mom, and she said that she had, I guess, gone in and then she'd like left to go to a gift shop or whatever. And then she came back, and I guess they, at that point in that little time frame, they had decided to remove mom's trach and let that close off because she was doing so good breathing with the nasal cannula. Within a couple of days, my mom got off the ventilator. She started being able to breathe with her trach capped. She got off oxygen and she got her trach removed. And this was with that nurse at the previous hospital saying, I don't know what they're going to do with your mom. At this point, they were discussing next steps with my mom because she was doing so good. She was off oxygen and everything. And this hospital, they don't like specialize in like rehabilitation. So they were like, let's go ahead and talk about getting your mom sent to like a rehabilitation place or a nursing facility, preferably. So she ended up being able to get into the same nursing home as my dad. And that infection, by the way, cleared up. I forgot to mention that. And so she went to this rehabilitation place. And that's kind of where we're at now. The main thing right now is my mom, like, she hasn't walked in 2 months. So they're working on, getting her stronger for that. She's got a lot of confusion on her. So they're working on that. They're working on getting her to where hopefully she can get the feeding tube taken out. So they're like giving her bites of like pudding and thickened drinks and things. So hopefully she'll be able to eventually get the feeding tube out because she hasn't been able to basically eat other than like the pudding and various things that they've been trying now. She hasn't been able to eat in almost 2 months. That's kind of where mom's at. They're just working on cognitive and, speech therapy and as well as physical therapy. My dad, he'd been there like 3-4 weeks longer than mom. So like he's a lot farther along. So my dad's up walking with his walker. He is going a pretty good distance. He's able to like do his own toileting and, that kind of stuff. And he's come a very long way. His main thing holding him back is he's on a pretty high amount of oxygen. I think they've gotten it to be lowered a little bit, but he is on a pretty high amount of oxygen, like somewhere between 4 and 6 liters. And so they're wanting to get that down. But the issue has been that, so with the oxygen tube, he has the nasal cannula. They have to, like, I guess, dilute it basically with water so that way it doesn't, like, make your nose bleed and all that stuff. So I guess he was getting excess water on him and his skin was, like, bloating up and he had actually put on a good amount of weight. So that was putting a lot of pressure on his heart, which was then making him need the oxygen. They've been giving him pills to get the excess water off, and he's peeing. He said like every 5 minutes. He said that there was one time that in 15 minutes he went 3 times. So that is basically where both of my parents are at. They are both currently in the nursing home trying to get better. And long story short, or short story long, that's why I've not made videos in a while. Because we've been dealing with all of this. And then I've been taking care of their bills. And, my siblings have been helping with stuff out at my parents' house, keeping everything going there. And, all the things that you don't think about whenever it comes to someone else's property and their own personal stuff. Like, you gotta pay their bills, you gotta make sure they got propane, you gotta make sure their cars don't have their batteries die or their tires get flat by not moving. You got to, clean freezers out because they're not going to be there to eat it and you don't want the food to go to waste. So you have to do that and all of this kind of stuff, pay their bills, all that. So that's basically what I've been doing in the past 2 to 3 months. And I'm hoping that within the next couple of weeks, I'll be able to start making videos again. I've got lots of stuff in mind and I'm starting to get excited again and antsy to start those things. I'm going to give it probably a little bit longer, maybe a couple more weeks. And then since I haven't even edited a video in a while, so that will all take time for me to get more stuff out. But just kind of wanted to explain everything that's been going on and say that I'm going to be coming back here soon and, stay tuned for lots of, exciting to me at least, things. So, yeah, that's what's been going on, and that is about it. So, thanks for watching. I will see you guys in the next one.